Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group, 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com. That's BEAT-IRS. Serving Alaskans, Americans since 1978 with 2 generations of tax defense attorneys. We have online with us Daniel Horowitz, Senior Editor of Conservative Review, Policy Director of the Madison Project, Contributing Editor at Red State, and also writes This Week in Washington segment on theblaze.com. And Daniel and I were talking during the break about what is there to be done. Basically, if you've got somebody that's a patriot in Congress that wants to reverse the leftward lurch of the federal government, wants to restrain federal power, enhance freedom, what's somebody like a Representative Huelskamp to do in Congress, or is there anything that such an individual can do? Daniel Horowitz, tell us your view.
You know, this is going to sound very grim, but there is light at the end of the tunnel here. The short answer is no. And again, this is with a guy like Paul Ryan, with Mitch McConnell. They're going to run these institutions like a plantation. So if you want to put forth a bill and say, hey, we need to reform the refugee program, we need to reform the Federal Reserve. At Conservative Review, we have so many good ideas. Conservatives have so many good policy ideas. None of them see the light of day. And there's nothing they can do about that. Ultimately, this has got to come from the top, and unless one of us is elected as president, we nominate one of the few true conservatives in the race, and he flushes the party down from the top and cleans it out, it's too systemically flawed. I just don't see anything. But I do see usefulness in the following. I always tell people the only thing worse than the politicians screwing us is for them to screw us and the people not to find out about it. And, you know, there is, and the reason is, it's not just to complain, it's you have to know what's going on in order to come to a healing process, burn it down, and rebuild. And I think you're seeing that now. Many of us on the inside were frustrated over the years that people just didn't get it, what the Republican Party was all about. They'd lie to people during the elections and do just the opposite. You look at the polling data, and Republicans are so unpopular among their own voters. The truth is getting out there, and I think this is what these members could do and say, hey, look, I tried with this. These guys blocked me. Here's what they did. Yeah, every day just slash and burn. Mitch McConnell, when I went after him in a primary, helping recruit candidates a couple of years ago against him, it wasn't so popular. People thought Mitch McConnell was a conservative. Now everyone knows he's not. He has a higher disapproval rating among Republican voters than Democrat voters. It's astounding for a party leader.
Yeah, you look at the Democrats and their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the party. Of course, they've got a high degree of dissatisfaction too, but it doesn't come anywhere close to what we see on the Republican side of it. One of the things I wanted to turn to just briefly, I mean, you talked about a top-down type change, conservative Republican at the head. There's some disturbing polling information coming out about Americans' perspectives on, socialism versus capitalism. I don't know whether you saw the poll or not this weekend concerning Democrats. Over 50% of them now embrace socialism. They believe that is actually a positive. It's near 50-50 as to whether or not socialism or capitalism is better for the country. And you look at what the youth are saying, what they're saying, their political views, their perspective on, for example, the Bill of Rights, their lack of knowledge on the First Amendment, their willingness to impose punitive consequences on those that speak with speech that's not considered to be politically correct. And project that out a generation or two, these changes that are taking place. And some would suggest that this is perhaps our last chance, that if we don't get this presidential election right, that we might as well just consign America, to the ash heap of European history. Basically, another failed socialist state, rejecting its foundation. What's your perspective? Do you have that dire of a view?
I do have that dire of a view, and I will announce to your listenership, I am writing a book with that thesis from a slightly different angle. And you know where we're going to take this, Joe. I'm an immigration guy. And
right.
And a lot of, not exclusively, a lot of it's, even among the native population, the education system. But again, when you talk about the Democrat Party base, when you talk about, especially you mentioned the youth, an ever-increasing share of both of those are immigrants. And, that's the thing. We're having a hard enough time with patriotic assimilation among natives. We have a huge – the Hudson Institute a couple of years ago put out a report, I think in 2013, on our broken patriotic assimilation system, we have never had such a sustained period of time with so much immigration, so many new voters in one shot, dwarfing the great wave of immigration. And most of them, 90%, are not from Europe. And they're from Latin America, places in Asia, Africa, and they're coming from areas where the predominant ideology is Marxism or liberation theology, and they bring that with them. And,
Right.
Immigrants were always kind of leaning more towards Democrats, but when they come in absorbable numbers, slowly, gradually, they by the second generation, they kind of get absorbed into our values. Instead, what they're doing is changing our values because there's so many of them. The numbers are staggering. I've seen reports on gun rights. 80% of Asian immigrants don't believe in gun control. Only 50% of naturalized citizens, so these are the immigrants that are even naturalized, think that schools should teach children to be proud Americans. Just 37% of naturalized citizens think the U.S. Constitution is a higher authority than international law. I mean, this is a big, big problem.
Where's that data coming from?
It's in several places. Phyllis Schlafly has put all this information out.
I've got a very multicultural family, a son-in-law that's Mexican, brother-in-law Indonesian, another brother-in-law Indian, all but one U.S. citizens now. But when you talk to them about their expectations of the federal government, I mean, they come from countries where the national government is the end all. I mean, obviously, if the federal government says X is X and Y is Y, well, that's got to be it. There's not a concept of sovereign state, the type of federalism that this country was designed with. And then gun rights, another issue, too. And let me tell you, I love my family dearly, but there is not, of course, the historical perspective that Americans that grew up, learning about the Revolution and the founders and the Bill of Rights understand. And when I ran in 2014, I drew the link between immigration and loss of Second Amendment rights. And a lot in the media kind of made fun of it. Yeah, look at California. I mean, that's a good example.
That's the thing. There's a vivid example in front of us. California is now 28% foreign-born, and 44% of the entire state's population speaks a language other than English at home. Do you understand what that is? Numbers matter, and origin to a certain extent matters. It's not that we can't take immigrants from certain places, but numbers do matter. You can't tell me, 100,000, let's be bringing carte blanche, 100,000 new immigrants from Canada versus 100,000 from Somalia or Guatemala. It doesn't make a difference. They do come. It's not their fault. I mean, they come with the values they're used to. Thomas Jefferson, in the notes on Virginia, in his early writings, he warned about this. Even a young, nascent country that had a wide-open frontier, it was underpopulated, they needed people. Even then, he said, I really wonder about bringing in many more people. And he was talking about Europeans, not people from radically divergent cultures. And it's funny, the one hyphenated Americanism, the one hyphenated term the founders used, they called themselves Republican Americans, as in lowercase Republicanism. He said, what is this going to mean? They are not used to us. Imagine, he actually said, imagine if we were to bring in millions of Republican Americans to France. They would be very unfamiliar with their system, and they would change it. This is a bedrock principle throughout our history. Both parties understood this, that there was a limit to immigration, and it's just gotten out of control. And I do not see how we could win another election if we don't start making major changes to our immigration system.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Of course, there are other moves afoot, too, that if we don't change, it's going to be lost. And, of course, that's raising in a number of people's minds, what should we do next? Activism, getting the word out, obviously, those are important things. Subject for another discussion at some other time. Daniel, I appreciate you being on the Joe Miller Show.
Absolutely. Fun as always.
Stay with us. Be right back after these messages.